I was scrolling through my comments a year ago or so, and right at the bottom of this post was this guy suggesting I put the master cycle into Minecraft. I thought that was a pretty great idea. I immediately had an image in my head of myself driving a motorcycle through my Minecraft worlds, and man did it seem amazing. So, after giving it a fair amount of thought, I completely scrapped the idea. Why? Well, the whole point of custom vehicles is to move the player around in a way they couldn't move before. With the Datapack, if I wanted to move an entity around, I would normally just modify its motion and BT data up to 20 times per second. But if I try to do anything like that with the player, the game prevents it. That's not to say that when you're trying to move the player around, you don't have options, but all of your options are pretty bad here. There's the levitation effect, which only helps if you want to modify vertical motion, up and down. I don't need to explain why this isn't helpful, right? Then there's constant teleporting. But tell me honestly, would you want to control a bike that moves around like this? The third option is to push the player around using instantly detonating creepers. Ignoring the fact that creepers that detonate instantly will still visually appear for a frame or two before exploding. This is just an insane way to try to deal with this problem. So it seems like I just didn't have any good options here. Is what I would say if I was a liar. I already showed it off in Grazi's video back in August. I guess I should talk about that for a second in case you missed it. In May, I searched Breath of the Wild map in Minecraft, and I found a video with around 20,000 views made by a guy named Grazi where he recreated the entire Great Plateau. I commented asking if I could fix up my Datapack and make his Great Plateau actually playable. After that, his video blew up, my comment blew up, and Grazi reached out to me saying he was down. So yeah, we're a team now. He's building the map, I'm making it functional. Watch his videos if you haven't already. This man is incredible at both building and video editing. I mean, look at this. It's insane. I'm getting sidetracked. Okay, so Master Cycle. Over a year ago, I'd totally given up on implementing the bike, so I went back to living my life. One day I was doing my thing, throwing rocks at children, and I got a message from my buddies at Yegs. They told me they were working on a game called Cosmic Cruisers, and they asked if I wanted to help test it. So I did. Turns out it's basically Mario Kart in Minecraft, and the karts are incredible. They've got these smooth animations, clean handling, they can go up slopes, and most surprising to me of all, they could be controlled with WASD. The whole time I was testing it, I was like, now that is interesting and I want it. Suddenly, everything had changed. I knew it was possible. They mentioned that their vehicles worked using minecarts, so I had two questions that I needed to find answers to. How do you read the player's inputs when they're in a minecart, and how do you actually do something with those inputs when they're detected? Let's start with the first one, detecting the player's inputs. An easy way to read player inputs is to just assign the player's hotbar slots to different directions. If the player has slot 1 highlighted, go forward. If it's slot 2, turn left. Slot 3, turn right, and so on. This works, and it's pretty easy since you just have to read the selected slot and BT data of the player. But it's also gross. Nobody wants to use a scroll wheel or hotkeys to drive their vehicle. Besides, as I mentioned before, the Yegs cart worked with WASD, which means that there must be some NBT value that changes when different WASD keys are pressed. I just need to find out what value that is so I can detect it. My first guess was that the minecart velocity changes when you use WASD. That would explain how you can push a minecart that you're sitting in while you're on rails and how you can tell horses to move. To test this theory, let's just output the motion and BT data of the minecart and see how it changes. It doesn't change. Well, it can't be the player's motion NBT that changes because they're not actually moving. It's the player's motion NBT that changes. Whatever, not gonna question it. So it looks like the player's motion changes in 9 ways. Notice that as I press different keys, the green middle number, the up and down component, never changes. So we're pretty much just gonna want to ignore it. If you don't hold anything, this is your motion vector. If you hold W, this is the motion vector. If you hold W and D, this is the motion vector. If you hold D by itself, this is the motion vector. Let's draw these vectors as points on a graph. You may be noticing a pattern with the vectors here, so I'll just fill in the rest of them. Now to check which keys the player is holding, we just need to say, is this their motion vector? If it is, then we know they must be pressing W. Then, just in case they're not pressing W, we'll run that check on all other possible vectors as well. Now, if we constantly check this for all 9 possibilities, one of them should match and we'll know what button they're holding. Sounds great, doesn't it? Well, it's not. It's broken. This is the set of vectors for when the player is facing perfectly northward. If the player rotates a little bit, then all of the vectors change, so if we tried to run the same checks as before, it wouldn't find matches. Or worse, it would find the wrong matches. If you were turned exactly 180 degrees, then pressing W would trigger the S key's behavior. So let's step back a bit and go back to Minecraft. Every tick, this command block will put my motion vector into the position of this armor stand. So if I'm not moving at all, the armor stand will be at 0, 0, 0. If I hold W, it'll be offset from 0, 0, 0 in the same direction that I'm rotated. Now let's make this armor stand invisible and give it tiny particles because the vectors are too small to see easily with this huge armor stand here. As you can see, the vector changes depending on what key I press. If I rotate my camera, the entire set of vectors rotates as well. This is where the magic comes in. Every tick, we're gonna run a command. This command will start out at 0, 0, 0, then it'll rotate the same direction the player is facing. Then it'll move forward by the magnitude of the motion vector, which is a fixed number that I can just copy paste. And then we'll see if the invisible armor stand is really close by. If it is, then we'll say in chat that W is being pressed. If we do that 7 more times, one for each remaining direction that the motion vector could be angled depending on the key combinations that could be held by the player, then we'll have perfectly functioning WASD detection. For the most part. The set of vectors we're checking don't all seem to update immediately. So if you rotate your camera too fast, there could be a split second where the wrong direction gets triggered. But there's not really anything that we can do about that, and the system still works pretty well anyway. Except for one more thing. See this? Sometimes the system just stops detecting inputs. It took me a while to figure out why. The issue is that if you're sprinting when you start writing an entity, the motion vectors will all be at a different scale. So instead of the armor stand only potentially appearing at these places, it could also be at these places that aren't found by our detection ranges. This scared me because the obvious solution is to add more checks. But running the current 8 checks is already enough to make me worried about slowing the datapack down. Adding another 8 is a worrying idea. But then I thought, these potential locations should trigger the same behavior whether they're the scaled down versions or the scaled up versions. Could I just change how I run the check for each input? Here's how we're going to do it. If we shift and scale our search, it will overlap both points. So if you press W, it won't matter if the scaled down version or the scaled up version is being triggered by the player. Both possibilities are found by the same check. To implement this change, we just go to our code, move out a little bit further, and increase our search distance. We do have to be careful not to increase the search distance too much or it could detect the other inputs as well. But yeah, now it detects WASD at all times. Thanks to my roommate for helping me figure out how to modify the check. Now that we've got the input detection working, we can hook it up to some actual functionality. If the player holds A or D, the bike turns. If the player holds the W button, we'll increase the bike speed scoreboard value. Every tick that they don't, it'll be decreasing. We'll clamp the values so they stay between 0 and 30 inclusive. Now for the difficult part, actually moving the bike forward in the direction that it's rotated. The first part of that, moving the bike, has one challenge. We still can't change the motion of the player entity, but because of the way that we've set up our WASD detection, the player's going to be riding another entity while they're using the master cycle anyway. Can I just set the motion of the entity that they're riding? To test this, we'll have to hop on my ex's favorite pet pig and try setting its motion data. Alright, we'll do that. We can just set the motion NBT of the entity that the player's riding. How do we do that exactly? Well, we just type /data merge entity minecart motion number. The number signs need to be replaced with numbers that actually describe the motion that we want. The first number is for the speed on the x-axis, the second number is for the speed on the y-axis, up and down, and the third number is for the speed on the z-axis. So if we set the 3 numbers to 500, the minecart would move perfectly down the x-axis. If we set the 3 numbers to 050, it would shoot in the air, moving along the y-axis. And if we set the 3 numbers to 005, it would move perfectly along the z-axis. But just moving along each individual axis isn't useful here. So the question is, what 3 numbers can we choose to make the minecart move in the direction that it's facing? And actually, the bike shouldn't really go flying upward, so we know the y value should just be 0. That means we just have to find 2 numbers, the x and z values. Luckily, we don't have to pull them out of nowhere. We already have 2 numbers, an angle and a speed, so we just need to convert them. To do this, let's start by drawing the motion vector. We know the angle and the length, and we want to find the length of this line and the length of this line. We also know these 2 lines have a right angle between them. If you remember any geometry from school, you might already have an idea of how to find these 2 lengths. Because we know this angle, this length, and we know it's a right triangle, we know it's a perfect candidate for using SOHCAHTOA, which, in case you didn't know, is just these 3 equations. By the way, this third one isn't going to be helpful right now, so let's just get it off the screen. So let's just plug in values. Solve for opposite in the first equation, and we have the formula for the length of this side. Solve for adjacent in the second equation, and we have the formula for the length of the other side. And there. The x velocity will be the speed of the bike times cosine of the bike's rotation, and the z velocity will be the speed of the bike times sine of the bike's rotation. And there we go. Geometry was the key to solving a problem that we had in a Minecraft Datapack problem.
Thank goodness, too, because it's not like you could have just Googled it.
Yeah, so of course I could have just Googled it, and I did already know the formulas off the top of my head. I just really wanted to talk about sine and cosine for a second, because they're really cool. I could talk about sine and cosine for at least another 10 minutes, and I've got animations that I've already made for this video and had to cut, but I'm not really proud of the math explanations in my last video, so we're just gonna move on. It's wonderful that we've gotten this far, but this is where we find yet another problem. We found the correct formulas, but we can't actually run them. We would want to run them every time we want to update the bike's velocity, which should be every tick, but look what happens when we try typing it in. It just fails. Not a huge surprise, everyone knows that if you're making a data pack that uses math, you have to use scoreboards to do that math. So let's try doing it with scoreboards. Scoreboards need us to break down this formula and run it one operation at a time. So we'll start by setting the x velocity to the speed, then we want to multiply it by cosine of the rotation. This is where we run into our issue. Minecraft scoreboards don't have a way to calculate sine or cosine. On a regular calculator, you can just type sine or cosine 45 and it's going to spit out the answer. There's no operation for that with scoreboards, just basic addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, and one or two others. So we don't even have access to the second half of the values in this formula. Or should I say, we don't have direct access. Now, here's a little lesson in trickery. If we execute a command as 000, rotated the same direction as the bike, and put a marker entity one block forward, Minecraft will use sine and cosine to choose the position of the marker. So we can just read the position after it's done. Basically, we don't have access to sine and cosine, but Minecraft itself does, so we're hijacking it. Hello, it is me from the future. We are no longer using this method. There was a dude named Bhaskara 1400 years ago, and one day he was like, the Minecraft community is going to struggle with their lack of access to basic sine and cosine usage, so he opened up Desmos and played with numbers until he found this formula. This formula is just an approximation, but since I only need 2 decimal places of accuracy anyway, it works perfectly here. It even runs faster than that more hijacky method I was using for almost a year. Now I figure most people left during the math section. If you're still here, consider subscribing. This math section alone has taken me 3 or 4 weeks of work, between the 40 or more hours I spent learning how to use 3Blue1 Browse animation software, and the 7 or so rewrites the script has gone through. If it made any sense at all, or especially if it finally made something click for you, please let me know in the comments. I'm terrified of posting another explanation as unclear as my last video was. Alright, now that we have a substitute for sine and cosine, our formulas should work and we should be able to connect them to the input detection logic. Oh, also, we're going to switch from the minecart now. Instead, we're going to use a pig riding an armor stand. The armor stand can hold items, so it'll be able to display the master cycle model we'll make in a bit, and the pig is also needed because you can't right-click an armor stand to ride it. In theory, the bike should move around in the way that it's supposed to now, so let's give it a try. Oh yeah, this needs to be able to climb blocks. So we'll check every tick if there's a block in front of the bike. If there is, we'll just teleport it up by 1 block. Wait a second. Okay, so we need to climb blocks if there's a block in front of the bike, but not if there's a block on top of that one. Let's also give the bike some upward velocity if it climbs a block that doesn't have another block behind it. That way you can climb up hills and jump off ramps. I'm also changing the bike so you don't have control over it while it's in the air. You can't speed up, you can't slow down, and you can't stop or start turning. Also, if the bike's airborne and you press S, I'll make it so you jump off like you do in Breath of the Wild. You can also enter bullet time while on the Master Cycle in Breath of the Wild. Making that work while riding the bike is so much easier than the war zone that was my first video, because I can actually modify the motion of the bike directly, instead of exploiting broken levels of the levitation effect until we get something that looks halfway decent. Also, I never gave the S key a grounded function, I just made it so you jump off if you press it while you're in the air. I'm thinking it can either be applying brakes, or it can be making the bike jump. We don't have enough buttons for both. I'm going to stick to jumping, because if you stop accelerating for a second or so, you're going to stop anyway. If I make S be a jump button, then there's at least some new functionality. So we'll stick with that unless you guys disagree and really want a brake button. This is all great, except for when you go off a jump while turning. We've set up the bike in such a way that it will only ever try to travel forward, so when it lands at a drastically different angle than it had when it jumped, it suddenly jerks forward in the direction it's facing. In real life, if you're on a bike and you land facing perpendicular to the direction you're moving, all of your momentum stops, or it gets converted to rotational kinetic energy and the bike rolls. Either way, you don't suddenly jerk forward. I'd love to throw up my hands and just say, it's a video game, it doesn't need to be accurate. But if the Breath of the Wild devs can make it so realistic, then we can do the same. Now our new question is, what is the bike's velocity after it lands? Well, velocity is a combination of speed and direction, and we know the direction is just going to be whatever direction the bike is facing, so the only question we need to answer is, what's the new speed? Let's get some intuition for this problem. But first, ignore my Halloween costume glove, it's the only glove I have. If the bike movement is 0 degrees and it lands facing 90 degrees, it should stop. This is the same as multiplying the speed by 0. If the bike movement is 0 degrees and it lands facing 0 degrees, it should keep all of its speed and just keep moving forward. This is the same as multiplying the speed by 1. If the bike is moving 0 degrees and it lands facing 180 degrees perfectly backward, it should start moving backward, which is the same as multiplying the speed by -1. Let's visualize each of these scenarios as vectors. The orange arrow is the movement direction and the blue arrow is the landing direction. When the two arrows point in the same direction, we multiply the speed by 1. When they're perpendicular, we multiply it by 0. When they're opposites, we multiply it by -1. Great, we've got these 3 situations covered, but what about everything else? We need some math formula to tell us what this number should be, no matter what the 2 angles are. Finding this number sounds like a confusing task, but I'll shine a little light on this problem. I mean that literally. If we shine a light from above the movement vector, there will be a portion of the movement vector that is shaded by the landing vector. That portion is the portion of the movement vector we want to keep. So if the 2 vectors are the exact same angle, the shadow covers the entire movement vector, so we get to keep all of it. If the 2 vectors are perpendicular, then the shadow covers nothing, so we get to keep none of the movement vector and the bike should stop. This continues to work on this side, telling us that the shadow covers a negative amount of the vector, so we'll not only need to scale the speed of the bike down, but we'll also need to reverse its direction, which is perfect for when the bike lands backwards. To sum that up, we shine a light on the vectors. The number by which we multiply the bike speed is the percent of the orange vector that's shaded by the blue vector. So what's the actual math for projecting one vector onto another like this? You literally just multiply the x components together, multiply the z components together, then add the 2 results. It's super straightforward so long as both your vectors are 1 unit long. You just learned linear algebra for Minecraft. If you want to learn more, look into dot products and vector projection. I love this solution because it even works when the movement vector changes. It's a one-size-fits-all solution. It's so hecking cool, I just can't get over it. Check out how perfectly this works. It works when you don't turn, it works when you land at a 90-degree angle, it works when you land facing backwards, it works at every other angle in between. Math is so great, guys, I'm telling you. And if you don't pay attention in school, you're not gonna have any idea how to approach problems like this when they come up in your own little projects that I know you're gonna be doing because it's really dang cool and I think it's really interesting and you should do it too. Okay, but for real though, like pay attention in school because they literally just hand you the tools that you need to solve this stuff for yourself. It is so much fun. Just be a nerd. Be like me. Worst case scenario is you get a job in science and math and computers or something, and you're just rich. You studied in school so you could learn to play Minecraft better, and now you make 6 figures, and people look up to you, and they think you're smart, and they come to you and ask you to fix their Wait, never mind. Actually, I take it back. Don't be smart. Just give up. Alright, so this bike handles beautifully, but the same can't be said for its looks. Nothing personal. You're just embarrassing. There's nothing that really matches the aesthetic of the Master Cycle in Minecraft, so it's time to make a custom model. I'm using Blockbench to create a custom item model that looks like the Master Cycle. The armor stand is going to wear the custom item model in its helmet slot. I'll also make the armor stand's head tilt if I'm turning, climbing, or jumping. Now to actually make the item model. I drew the base textures by hand, but the base texture alone is not enough. In Breath of the Wild, there's an animation that plays when you summon the bike. The full animation lasts for 45 frames, or a second and a half. The first part of this animation shows the bike materializing into a blue glow, and the second part shows that glow fading. To do this in Minecraft, I need to make a separate texture image for every single frame. But the problem with that is that I don't want to. So instead, I wrote a Python script. The idea for the script is to work backwards, frame by frame. We have the end result, we just need to gradually turn it blue and then delete pixels from it until they're all gone. Play those steps forward, and the summon animation will play perfectly. So now I have a texture for each frame. Now we are so close to seeing this in action, hold on just a little longer. The next step is to assign those textures to their own custom model, and then while the bike is being summoned, change the item model in the armor stand's helmet slot every tick. To do that, we'll keep track of how many frames it's been since the bike was summoned. Then we have to have this huge chunk of code that says, if we're on frame 1, execute the code for frame 1. If we're on frame 2, execute the code for frame 2. If we're on frame 3, execute the code for frame 3, and so on. For 80 different frames. This does work, but it's disgusting. Every single tick, we have to check for every single frame. It doesn't matter which frame you're on. If you're on the last frame, you have to check every other possibility before you get there. And if you're on the first frame, you can't stop checking just because you found the correct frame immediately. Once you've run the code for the first frame, you still have to go line by line through the rest of these checks until you're done with the file, even though you know there's no way any of them are going to trigger. It's terribly inefficient, so we're going to learn about one more thing before I finally get to show you the master cycle in action. The binary search. The idea is really simple, and you probably already use it without knowing. When you want to go to a specific page in a book, do you start at page 1 and check each page one at a time until you find the page you're looking for? No, you probably pick a page closer to the middle of the book, look at the page number you open to, and check if the page you're looking for is earlier or later in the book. Then you repeat that until you found the page you're trying to find. We're going to implement that logic. In the bike summoning animation, we've got 80 frames, but let's just say there's 32, so this animation fits on the screen. Let's also say that we're on frame 12. We know the frame we're looking for is between 1 and 32, so let's take the middle of that range here. Is the number we're looking for on the left or right of the arrow? The left, so we can ignore those to the right. Our new range is 1 through 16. Take the middle number here. Is the number that we're looking for on the left or the right? The right, so we can ignore the frames on the left. Our new range is 9 through 16. Take the middle number, the number we're looking for is on the left. Our new range is 9 through 12. Take the middle number, the number we're looking for is on the right. Now our range is only 2 numbers. Is it the first frame? No, it's the second one, so we run that frame's code. This is how it looks in our datapack. Our current search range is 0 through 79, so we run the file with that name. Then we check if the current frame is in the lower half or the upper half of that range and run the corresponding file. Let's say we're looking for frame 14, so we run the lower ranges file. And we repeat this process until our range is just 2 numbers, 13 and 14. If the frame is 13, we run frame 13's code. But it's not. We're looking for frame 14, so we run frame 14's code. It's kind of annoying that we need a different function for every possible range. It's way more functions than we used to have, but it's still way more efficient because only a couple of those functions actually get executed every tick. Just having the functions without executing them isn't actually really a problem. What is a problem though is writing each function. Doing it manually would have taken at least 20 minutes, so instead I spent an hour writing this Python function to automate it for me. Man, I love coding. Anyway, with the old method, the linear search, the amount of checks we had to do increased linearly with the amount of frames. So if we added a new frame, we always had to run an extra check every tick. Each check could only eliminate one potential correct frame. But with the new method, the binary search, if we add a bunch of frames, we wouldn't need to run an additional check every tick until we doubled the amount of frames in the animation, because each check cuts the search range back in half again. The amount of checks we have to run increases logarithmically with the amount of frames. It's crazy, look at this graph. With the old method, if we had 1024 frames, we'd need 1024 checks every tick. But the new method could find the correct frame in only 12 checks. This topic, asking how does the amount of work we have to do scale with the size of the input, is a huge part of computer science. But I'm going to stop myself from going into it here. If you're interested in learning more, or if you ever want to do well in a programming job interview, then look up time complexity, big O notation, and maybe try solving practice problems on sites like LeetCode and Code Wars. Breath of the Wild has one more aspect to the animation than just materializing the bike model. These particles. But I'm too excited to actually show you guys the animation to go into depth about how I made it here. I'm going to make a video explaining a bunch of different particle effects that I've used Python to generate, so if that sounds interesting to you, subscribe. And hit the bell because with my upload schedule, you're going to want a heads up. Alright, time for the last couple touches, and here we go. Download link is in the description. I can't promise that it'll have much new stuff besides the master cycle though. There's a lot that I'm in the middle of changing, so I can't release a new update right now. In the meantime, join my Discord. Every now and then, I'll post images and clips of the stuff that I'm working on, and I'll get feedback on things before I put them in a video. Shout out to these people who've already joined and who gave me their usernames when I asked back in August. Also, something else to do while waiting for a new update. 2 other people have made their own Breath of the Wild datapack, and it's really cool. Actually better quality than mine in a lot of ways. My datapack right now is kind of just a collection of prototypes, and it works, but the one made by Cray and Joris was actually meant to be played. Check out their videos and try out their version. Thanks guys for your support. If you enjoyed, go watch one of the other videos in the series, and if you haven't checked out Grazi yet, I don't know what you're doing with your life.